Hey, happy Monday. I survived Boston some way, somehow. Viva Seltzer did not get the best of me. This weekend had a really great time outside of Alabama not covering. Tonight we have the national championship game, and who better to bring in than the man that is absolutely on fire on wagertalk.com. Mark Zeno has just been crushing, and I hope I'm not mushing him by saying that. Mark, welcome in.
Well, Kelly, great to be here with you. Yeah, it's been listen, they don't come along often. When they do, you just kind of got to ride it. But, we had a 10-0 streak. We're at 15-4 over our last 19 plays across all sports, college basketball, NBA, Major League Baseball. So we'll try to keep it going tonight. Got a 5% best bet on the page right now. 2 plays in tonight's national championship game, plus a baseball play on the package right now, wt.buzz/MZ. So we're swinging big tonight, but we feel good. The video I put out today for the Wagertalk Instagram, the breakdown of the national championship, I'm sure we'll go over it a little bit here and some of the keys to the game. But, I think there really are some good tells in this game for what I think is going to be a very interesting game and a fun one to watch, to say the least.
Yeah, we'll see. Zeno, man, I'm going to say this much. We're going to talk about the national championship the entire time. I'm going to open up the Wager Talk odds screen really quickly. So if you guys do have a question, drop it in the chat, whether you want to talk about the side, the total, a player prop. There is 1-7 super. I apologize. DraftKings and Caesars also hanging a 7 on Connecticut. Total 144 pretty much across the board. So the under's been getting bet 143.5 at Caesars and DraftKings.
Kelly, there's been some buyback here on. Heritage and Bet Online today were hanging 7.5 early in the morning because I was on the phone with Brian Power, as I often am. In the mornings, but I was saying, my God, they're hanging 7.5 now. I wonder if this thing is going to go there across the board. So there's been some buyback on Purdue here. And I had this argument earlier on Wager Talk today with Teddy and Prez, who want to sit here and say that, and I don't say this disparagingly, but their argument is that UConn is undervalued because they keep covering these numbers. And I would argue that they've been overpriced for a while now. Because they keep covering doesn't mean that odds makers aren't overpricing them and putting a premium on them to play them. I mean, the result and the line aren't always necessarily related in that sense, if that makes sense. I mean, I made the Bama line against UConn 9.5 for 10. They opened up at 11.5. That 1.5 point premium has been pretty consistent pretty much since the second round of this tournament for UConn, when it started with San Diego State, right? When it was at 9.5, then it was at 10, 11, 11.5, 12.5, when I actually bet San Diego State, like on my book, I didn't offer it as a client play. I'm just like, this is insane. I got to bet San Diego State here because this number is just way too big. And they've been able to cover them all, to their credit. But remember now, UConn has also done a couple of things. One, they have been destroying teams in the second half. And that's really been something that people need to note, that if you watched a lot of these games and you watched UConn, with the exception of the first round game, a lot of teams have hung around in the first half. They've been worn down in the second half, and the UConn shooting in the second half has gone through the roof, and they've been able to pull away. But you have to look at this objectively, and at least according to what Ken Palm tells us, that this is the best defensive team that UConn has faced all along. And that is something that is going to be very notable. I would argue that Purdue has faced better teams than UConn has on their way to the Final Four. With NC State withstanding, that was kind of a joke. They came back down to earth. But, I just think that, again, this number is probably higher than what it would be. If you take this game out of the NCAA tournament and put it in the middle of November when these two teams would play, as they're currently constructed, this is probably a 4 or 5 point spread, right?
Yeah, not even. No, I would disagree. I would say on a neutral, 2.5. If we're talking November, that's how much UConn's trajectory has been since losing that game, that fateful Tuesday night in Creighton. They have just been on a rocket ship, Mark, as somebody who had a 12 in pocket with Alabama, because I made the game 9. I said 8.5, 9. We're getting spicy. Let's give them just a little bit more. But there was still a ton of value. I just think at tonight, maybe I'm going to be looking at Purdue in the first half. You mentioned the first half, second half splits. Here's the problem, and I'm going to say this, and myself included. Sometimes we're just a little too stubborn. And I think that might be what Teddy and Prez were trying to say, because I did catch a glimpse of Wager Talk today once I landed back in Florida. And sometimes you just got to say, you know what? This team is better than we've been giving them credit for. This team has been covering spreads at an insane clip. And yet there's people like me that just want to step in front of that freight train. Let's get a question here from the chat. UConn gets better in the tournament and has covered every March Madness game going back to last year's tournament. That is a correct statement. And,
yes,
and
they're not related events. They're all individual
I didn't say
events.
They are.
I know, but like people do that thing where it's like, oh, they're covering five. Like, I get that they've covered 5 in a row, and there is something to a team being on a run that I wouldn't discount. But UConn covering against San Diego State has nothing to do with UConn covering against Alabama. Would have nothing to do with them covering against
let's take a backtrack. I know this wasn't you that said it. It was Adam Trigger. He and I did the show last week, and he said, Kelly, I've been dead wrong on NC State. So I just can't lay it with Purdue. And I go, I've been wrong on NC State too, and I'm absolutely laying it with Purdue. Mm-hmm. Now I can't do the same thing. Does that make sense? Like, I did it without hesitation, knowing that NC State was not as good as their power ratings, that line, when they marched out that 9.5, they were definitive in that number. This number doesn't make any sense. You mentioned Ken Palm makes it 3. I make it 4.5. So at 6.5, 7, there is an immense amount of value. But man, this has just not been a great college basketball season for me, at least not since the Super Bowl down the stretch. So it's kind of like, would I play this if it was that Thursday game in November on a neutral? Probably not.
Let me add one more thing about this tournament that's been unique. And I remember telling everybody this, and I don't know if you remember me saying it, but when the Sweet 16 started, I told everybody repeatedly, forget the spread, just pick the winner, because the favorite will cover or the dog has won outright. And every single game since the Sweet 16 has held that form. Either the dog has won outright or the favorite is covered. So the spread doesn't matter, just pick the winner. In fact, if you go through this whole entire tournament, depending on the numbers, Brian Power and I did this morning, 4 games landed on a push. Other than that, there have only been 3 games in this tournament where the spread actually mattered, right? Where, like, the favorite won but didn't cover. Other than that, it has been, the dog winning outright or the favorite covering. So it's been a little bit of a different tournament in that aspect from the standpoint of you don't really have a lot of teams that are playing close games. Favorites are running away with things or dogs are winning outright. And that's kind of what you get when you get a run like NC State's that throws that out of whack. So I would just add that into this whole thing that, if you believe in Purdue tonight, you should be sprinkling some on the money line. And I said this to everybody about the semifinals. I would have never played either of the dogs full game. I only would have played them first half because, and here's the thing about, UConn. You know that old adage, Kelly, like, hey, on time is 5 minutes early. And if you're actually on time, you're late.
You're late.
If you are tied with UConn at half, you're actually losing. And if you're down by 3 or 4, you don't have a chance. You have to be leading at half in order to have a chance to beat UConn. So really, to me, looking at Purdue in the first half, why sweat out a full 40 minutes objectively when the first half is going to dictate whether they have a shot to cover the game? Because UConn has been running away with things in the second half. Now, to their credit, I would argue too, Purdue has done the same thing, particularly against the best competition in their last 3 games against Gonzaga, against Tennessee, and NC State. They've outscored their opponents by 21 points in the second half, 7 points per half in the last 3 games. That's a lot. So if you have a 3 or 4 point lead, guess what? Now you're covering double-digit spreads. So that's how good Purdue has been in the second half as well.
It's interesting. And I'll say this from the just media perspective, right? Everybody has made a big deal about Dan Hurley and the Huskies. And no one has really made a big deal about Purdue, but they've also covered every game in this tournament, and no one's talking about it. I know Kelly, Zach Edey gets some favorable calls.
You want to hear something crazy? The only non-conference loss that Purdue has in the last 2 seasons is Fairleigh Dickinson. Yep. Think about that. The game they lost is the only non-conference game that they have lost. They're 2-0 as a dog this year. So it's just the 3rd time that they've been a dog. And you see the question, Zach Edey meeting his match in the paint. The UConn's Donovan Clingan, the tall kid.
Yes, Clingan.
Okay, this was one of my keys to the game. If you saw the video I put out on Instagram and Twitter today, these 2 big guys going at it, Kelly. Edey is the decided edge. He's a decidedly better player than Donovan Clingan. What is going to be a very interesting here in this game is the officiating. I know we don't want it to boil down to the officials, but if they're calling this early and either one of these guys pick up 2 fouls and have to go to the bench in the first half, huge advantage for the other team. Now, in perspective, Purdue has played 38 games this year, Kelly. Do you know how many times Zach Edey has even got 4 fouls in 38 games this year?
0.
4. Yeah, 4. He's only gotten 4.
I was being a smartass with 0, but I knew it was a very low number.
Yeah. So he's only gotten to 3 fouls once in the tournament. He's a very good defender who is smart and doesn't take a lot of personal fouls. So I give the edge to him from that standpoint. Let's see. I think the other question is, has Clingan met his match? No, Edey has not met his match because nobody is his match. I still think to a certain extent they may have to double Edey a little bit. You're going to see very interestingly how this game unfolds. And don't forget, Kelly, I think the backcourt too is going to be a big part of this because, when Edey and Clingan have to kick the ball out, who's got the better shooters? Well, Purdue is second in the country in three-point shooting, right? Over 40%. Does that give them the edge? UConn is second in the country in two-point field goal percentage. Does that give them the edge? I don't know the answer. We're going to find out by about 9:30 tonight.
I think we will. So that gives me a good segue to the total here. So I was talking to my dad earlier, and he's like, what do you like? And I go, Dad, I made the game 77-74. UConn gets the win. That cashes my futures ticket. That cashes Purdue plus 6.5 or Purdue plus 7. And that also cashes the over. Like, I never want to bet the over in a national championship game. I think the last time I did was with Baylor, and I got very lucky because that game went to overtime. We've seen a ton of steam, as I mentioned earlier, 146. Now we're even seeing 143.5 here on the board. Mark, as far as the under goes, we know that if you look at the adjusted tempo of both of them, they're way below 2 and 300s, right? Like on Ken Palm, they are the exact opposite of, the Alabama and Auburns of the world. But we have seen historically lower scoring national championships before. I'm just not sure we're going to see that tonight. I mean, I know we talked about the adjusted defenses, but we also just talked about how good one team was from three-point land, and the other one is in the paint. So talk to me about the total, your thoughts on this one.
Well, I mean, I would argue, too, that, and I'm curious to know from bookmakers, maybe guys like John Murray would have some more insight on this, but I would tend to think a lot of the under money is coming in the first half. If you've paid attention, as I talked about earlier, both of these teams have turned it on in the second half. They've done more scoring late, right? And both of these teams have had tighter first halves than they have in the second half throughout the last, call it since the Sweet 16. The first 2 rounds for neither one of these teams really counted. They weren't playing any legitimate competition that could even, sniff the idea that they could beat their opponent. And that's, when this total first opened and I saw 68.5, I said, okay, maybe you go under there, right? Maybe that's where you look for the under in the first half, because the tendency is that these teams will feel each other out a little bit. They'll play a little slower. They'll make sure they're getting good shots up early because they don't want to find themselves in a cold shooting drought and get behind early and have to dig out of a hole. That usually dictates to a slower pace. To your point, this thing is coming down to a point where you have to start to look at yeah, I mean, to tell me that both of these teams aren't going to reach 70 would be quite shocking. And here, the one thing you do have to worry about here, anytime you see a blowout, it usually favors the under because the pace slows and one team just isn't doing enough offensively to carry their portion of the total over. So do you think a blowout's possible? I don't think so. I mean, obviously we would all say UConn would blow out Purdue, but that would, I mean, Purdue is just, I think we're undervaluing how good Purdue is. Like, I don't think we have this narrative about Purdue and Matt Painter and Zach Edey that they're a bunch of losers and they're not. This is a really good basketball team. Like, it's not hard to see how good they really are if you've watched it.
And, one of the things that they brought up, I heard the media talking about this, in regards to Virginia. Remember, Virginia lost as a 16 seed and then turned right back around and won a national championship. I've heard one person bring that up. One. Steve Lambert, welcome to the chat. Good friend, Steve.
Hey, buddy.
Love the over. Yeah. See, I kind of am. I haven't been in a hurry to bet this, right? I was a little frustrated at Alabama, who had all intents and purposes could have covered that game down the stretch. They just couldn't get it done. It's what happens when you kind of live and die by the 3. But that was one of their first under games. I mean, Alabama, even when they had a slower pace second half, I think that was against Clemson, was it?
Grand Canyon was that slugfest that they had in the
Regardless,
second
I think
round.
they still went over the total. And it was just, it was so, even though everybody's like, whoa, that, this one was like going to be in the high 80s and then it ended up in the like late 70s. But man, it was like one of those thoughts where like, oh, maybe you can bet an Alabama under. And then it was like, thank God I didn't do that. But I just feel like this is going to be one of those knockout, drag out, ESPN classic type national championship games.
Here's the interesting thing, and I'm curious to see what strategy Danny Hurley employs. Like UConn, I understand what their pace is, but do you doubt UConn the ability to play with tempo and push the pace and get up and down and play in transition? Because I don't. And if I was Danny Hurley, I would try to Zach Edey, who just played 40 minutes against NC State. I would try to run as fast as I can early and get that dude breathing heavy, because that's when he might get in foul trouble because he's tired, right? His arms won't go fully extended. He'll be leaning over a little bit more because he's out of breath. It's an interesting strategy to see if Daniel Hurley goes and tries to play in transition. Keep pushing the pace. Go, 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 and see if you could wear the best player on the floor in Zach Edey down. I don't know the answer to what he's going to do, but that's what I would at least try for the first, until the first media timeout. See if we can push this pace here and, get them out of their rhythm a little bit.
I don't think Purdue is going to get smashed by UConn. I think a lot of other people do. Instagram comment even saying, hey, I like them by 6 to 10. Don't forget, there's a lot of offerings that you can bet on this national championship game. It doesn't just have to be side and total. There's some really interesting player props available as well. I just don't see this, Mark, like you said. I don't see it being a blowout. Could I see it, UConn hitting some late free throws and winning by 8 and me holding a 7 ticket? 9? Yeah, I could. Because I watched that same Alabama game. In fact, CT made me watch it again because he didn't remember the second half at the Viva party, he told me. And I was sitting there watching and I was reliving the melt because that's exactly what started to happen. But you're right. They were down 4 at half. They got the first half cover. And
again, they made 8 of 11. Here's the crazy part, because I was talking to people about live betting the second half. I'm like, do we want to take Bama money line here? And the one reaction I got from multiple people was they went 8 of 11 from 3, and they're still losing. No, we're not betting Bama here.
Yeah.
Like that was the ultimate tell that they were not going to win that game, because they couldn't have shot any better from 3 than they did, and they were still losing. And so when you say, can they get blown out? It would take one of those shooting performances from Purdue that just is an anomaly, where it's 29% from the field and 18% from 3, and they're dead. And if that's the case, they're dead in the first 10 minutes of this game. Kind of
like we saw with every team that played NC State outside of Purdue. It's exactly what happened, right? Whether it was an anomaly, I won't say that, whether it was a good defensive performance, somewhere in between. But yes, that would be very detrimental. And the way this under is getting steamed today is just rather interesting. But I'm with Steve. I lean towards the over here. I'm gonna hang tight.
You have to. The under has to favor Purdue. We know it's usually correlated to the dog, but
that's fair.
If this thing is going over, it's because UConn is pushing towards 80.
Yeah, Juan, at 143.5, I think you're a little late. I mean, I would be looking to live bet this. Absolutely. I always think that most of the time, if you're sitting there in front of your computer and you have a good book that doesn't do the spin thing over and over and over again and not ever let you get a live bet in, then yes, you should be able to find a better number. There's going to be a point in time where these teams both run. Mark mentioned he's not sure if Hurley's going to push the pace or not in this game. Probably be my strategy as well. I mean, you're going to want to take out their best player. As you mentioned, Donovan Clingan is going to be who he's matched up with. It's going to be some big bodies down there in the paint, throwing some elbows, having a good old time. May result in go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I'm just, we mentioned the total moving and everything. Can I give you one bet that I would absolutely interest me in, especially if you're a Purdue backer? And this is a little bit, alternate market here. Purdue's first half team total, I see Heritage offering a 31.5. Go find me the last time that Purdue only scored 30 points in the first half of a basketball game this year. I don't think you're going to have a lot of success finding that. Now, I get it. It's UConn, and it's a whole different animal. But for them to be held, I would say, again, all this correlates. If Purdue scores only 29 points in the first half, they may be dead by halftime. Like, there's not a world where I see them scoring 29 and then somehow coming back with 45 in the second half and a major defensive performance. Because remember, to beat UConn, Kelly, you got to do two things, right? You got to score, and then you got to stop them from scoring. And so the fact that both of those could happen is pretty slim. You're probably going to get one out of two and hope to be in a position where you're in contention, right? So, but I think Purdue, first half team total, over 31.5, because this number keeps coming down, starts to look a little bit more appetizing to me across the board here, where you could take advantage and jump back in on an over. I mean, again, if they don't get to 30, if Purdue doesn't get to 30 in the first half, they may be dead by halftime.
That is a genuine concern. Let's see if we got some fun player props. Zach Edey, 24.5 points. Zach Edey, 12.5 rebounds. Tristan Newton, total points, 15.5. Little plus money there on the over. Tristan Newton, total rebounds. Lots of good stuff. Over threes made. Cam Spencer's got some prop bets. Of course, Donovan Clingan as well. I find it pretty funny that basically a lot of UConn guys have prop bets. Not that many Purdue guys. Braden Smith over rebounds. A couple of them off the board already. Anything that you like in the prop market, Mark?
I mean, for a guy who's averaging 28 and 15, if they're only putting 24 and 12 up there, you have to believe. I mean, that field.
His under currently at one of my books, 24.5 minus 150.
I mean, that's crazy. If you're getting plus money to over 24, if Zach Edey doesn't have 24 points, guys,
Purdue's in a world of hurt.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm trying to uncorrelate some of this stuff, but I don't think you can without any, success here. Zach Edey has to have a 27 and 14 kind of night if they're going to have a chance. If Donovan Clingan can check him that much, and I don't think he can, for the record. And I'm not much into the college player prop market at all. Just the volatility sometimes scares me. But, if he's, for a guy, again, who's averaging 28 and 15 in this tournament, for those numbers to be that much lower, that's the premium, I think, part of what you're paying on UConn. And he's the one guy I believe that absolutely is going to be his. He's a better player than Clingan, guys. I don't think it's close. I genuinely don't think it's close. I just don't think that Clingan. Go ahead, Kel.
No, I was going to say, look, I understand what he's averaging, but let's just say he loses by the hook. 24 out of Zach Edey does not mean that they won't cover this game. It's a very good night, especially when Braden Smith's over 10.5. His is minus 145 to the over. I mean, a lot of his teammates are getting a lot more love in the marketplace, but I would say that is very fishy. But could I see it losing by the hook? Absolutely.
Again, I would just put this in your head that they played Tennessee, and Tennessee in Ken Palm is the third best defensive efficiency team in the country. Zach Edey had 40 against them. Now, again, they didn't have a Donovan Clingan in the middle, but they also
I laid 3 with Purdue late there when that one kept coming down.
Yes. So if they can do that to a Tennessee defense, they can certainly do it to a UConn defense. The possibility is there. I'm not saying that it will happen. I'm just saying if a defense as talented and as good as Tennessee's across the board, Zach Edey can torture them for 40 points, they can do it to UConn.
Yeah, I'm kind of got my wheels spinning on how I'm going to hedge this future. The Kelly and Murray audience, I either owe them an apology or not. We're going to find out at the end of the night. Plus 750, John Murray and I have a dime on it. And
you guys.
I feel like you just got to let it ride at that point, right? And go for the middle, if anything. I don't think I want to hedge off. I think if I can find a 7 down here in Florida with the Boilermakers, that'd be the only way I really want to look in this game. I mean, let me look at the current money line. I bet it's just gotten completely obliterated.
I don't think you should.
Yeah, I mean, minus 310 right now for UConn. I could see a lot of money line parlays being tied into baseball, NBA tonight. So I'm sure the bookmakers would like UConn to lose from a futures perspective, but I have not gotten any intel from John Murray regarding that.
I mean, I would tell you yes. Like if you wanted to hedge, honestly, just play Purdue money line, like and throw a shekel down on that because I don't at plus 265, whatever it is, whatever in that area. That's the way I would hedge. That's the only way I would hedge in that scenario at plus money. I wouldn't take Purdue plus the points and leave it open that UConn could win and not cover, right?
Well,
like that.
But
that doesn't feel like
then you win both bets. I prefer it that way. I know.
That's not hedging. That's almost doubling down. You know,
it's middling. It's going. I have a 7-point middle because I have essentially UConn money line plus 750 in pocket is essentially what I have tonight.
Yes,
and that is a very good bet considering they're minus 310. So
that is a
fantastic. Logic says sit back. You did your job. Where's my CLV trophy? I got a new office today. I had to move in a different room of the house. So my CLV trophy's over there.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. I also had to move to a new office, but that's a whole different conversation.
Oh, boy. We're going to get you a new office soon. Soon, Mark Zeno. You have been on absolute fire. So at least you can,
they're coming, I promise.
At least you can pay for that absolute unmitigated disaster. Mark Zeno, wt.buzz/MZ. Let everybody know what you got up over at Wagertalk.
2 plays tonight in the national championship, including a 5% best bet. Cash 3 out of our last 4 or 5% plays in college hoops. Guys, 10-5 in the last 15 plays of 4% or higher in college hoops on a 15-4 all sports run. Also have a baseball play in there for tonight. So jump in, grab it. We got some 5-1 start to the baseball season, Kelly. We've approached baseball much smarter this year than we did last year. So it's paying off here. We're picking and choosing our spots in Major League Baseball. So off to a good start there. And it's a huge night, guys. Get that national championship package at wt.buzz/MZ.
Mark is the best. Make sure you guys are following him on all the social channels at Mark Zeno. All right, guys, we'll see you back tomorrow night. I've not figured out who's going to do the show, but Wednesday, we got Andy Lang. We are doing a full Masters show. And I think Thursday I'll be back with Carmine for some NHL. Good luck tonight on all of your wagers, and I will put out a tweet, but I think I'm going to try to find me a 7 and then try to find a live bet on the over. Good luck.